Okay, we are broadcasting and the channel is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Mateen, and we have watched well over 100 movies.
It's true. We've actually counted, and at least we counted for a while enough so to verify that we did in fact watch 100 movies, and then we kept going.
We watched 102 as part of the
That's
original.
right. Right. And not to mention the fact that although we don't have full documentation of it, we have in fact watched movies other than the ones we've talked about on the show. So even more.
Yeah.
All right. So hang on. I'm just paranoid about my software right now. And I think it looks okay. Okay. So tonight, everyone, we are at last able to record this episode. We decided last time to highlight another filmmaker who has been on the AFI list a number of times, but to look at some of their movies that weren't the ones listed on the AFI's list. So we decided to choose David Lean, who is on the list for The Bridge on the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia, both of which are films that we both enjoyed quite a bit, as I recall.
Yes.
And so this kind of came about just because I had been kind of looking at Dr. Zhivago as a film that loomed large in my own imagination, as a movie that I felt like I should watch that movie, and had been in that state of feeling like I should watch it for years and years and years without ever actually seeing it. Well, now I have watched it. And you have watched it too, presumably. So let's talk about it. Dr. Zhivago.
I'd seen it a handful of times before this. Um, I would typically, when I was younger, and when I would come across an urge to watch Lawrence of Arabia, this would usually follow shortly suit, just because they they share in their and like the spectacle of like the film making, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's very, they utilize landscape and location, you know, to an advantage even more than his other films, right? And so I've always linked them in my mind in that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is not. I mean, we'll kind of get to the heart of Doctor Zhivago. It's not as good as Lawrence of
Well,
Arabia.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not. It's just not the same movie, but it's not trying to be,
Mm.
which is why I think it's interesting, because it's taking this epic storytelling, lands, like I said, landscape shots, big beautiful vistas, and interesting parts of the world, and it's just telling a love story, like
Yeah.
a very simple love story, like. And this isn't an indictment on the movie, but this movie doesn't belong on the list of 100 movies, but it doesn't mean it's not a fun movie to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an odd, just it's a weird vehicle to tell. It's almost like a rom-com like level of plot,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
I
but
mean,
they
there's not
but
so much calm, but yeah.
right, but it's kind of that level of plot, right? Like there's not
Melodrama.
much more detail to it than a
Yeah.
rom-com, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
but yet it's told in this vehicle that like, I
Right.
don't know, it's interesting.
No, absolutely. So, we should probably cover what it's about for people who haven't seen it and don't know. But I'll certainly agree with the broad strokes of what you just said. I think the message I sent to you when I had finished watching it, I don't know if this is what I said exactly, but it was kind of what I had in my mind, which was it's tens of millions of dollars worth of production design draped over the sappiest love story imaginable.
Yes, and it's fun.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of loved it, I think is what I finished the line with. Um,
I mean, as
I
much
did,
as you could love a movie about the Russian Revolution, I mean, it's
yeah, I really liked it, but you're absolutely right. It is a very just very straightforward, basic love story, melodramatic even, that is just set during wartime with a lot of big elaborate set pieces to add to the various drama. So, instead of the reason that he can't get to his wife's side being because there's traffic, it's because he is shanghaied by the one side of a war, and they force him to work as their doctor for 8 months or whatever. Yeah. So in any case,
Yeah.
the movie is set in Russia during and kind of through the period of time. This is in between World War One and Two, correct? During the Bolshevik Revolution. Am I
Yes.
remembering correctly? It's been a little while, and I apologize to everyone that I've been ill, so I feel a little bit scattered, but I believe that was correct. So the basic premise is that we have this young man whose parents are killed, and he ends up getting raised by friends of his family that are relatively well to do, and he becomes a doctor. And this is the titular Dr. Zhivago. And gosh, I mean, it's just like, other than all these things happen, the rest of the plot is basically he always was kind of in love with his adopted sister, which is not played as creepy in any way. It's played as romantic, like even when they're kids. And it's just like, it's not adoptive in the way that we sometimes think of. It's really more like they took him in when his parents were killed.
Right. Yeah. It yes.
Right.
It's not. It totally makes sense. It was a different
Yeah.
time. You said. Yeah.
Right. So, in any case, he eventually does marry her, but then there's this other woman who I'm forgetting the actress's name. This is the second lead. What am I? Omar Sharif plays Dr. Zhivago, and then
Julie Christie's
yeah,
Laura.
there you go. Yes, and so Julie Christie plays Laura, who is a young woman who kind of has been forced to make a lot of questionable decisions like her whole life, just by virtue of the time period that she's growing up in and not having a lot of money. And she is kind of in love with this tight ass political revolutionary type that
Pasha.
eventually hmm?
Isn't that Pasha?
Yeah, who eventually becomes like this infamous military ruler. um, and but so Lara, who is technically with Pasha, and Dr. Zhivago, who's technically with this I'm forgetting her. I don't have all these names ahead of me right now, but like
Tanya.
that's right. Excuse me, Tanya. I'm pretty sure that's right. And so, but nonetheless, the two of them have a connection to one another. I think they're in St. Petersburg at first. But then eventually later they meet on the war front, where he's working as a doctor and she works as a nurse. And then they meet each other again, and they just keep having this connection until the point where they cannot refuse it any longer, and they begin having this big affair. Um, and this is all just set against the backdrop of the war. And that's basically the story, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff that happens, but that's the bones of the plot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of everything else that happens in the movie is really just and then stuff happens, right? Overall, I think that it has some really incredible, like, just the set pieces and the production design that we kind of talked about, just all of the stuff with the big, like the marches in the city at the beginning, where we're seeing like these protesters organizing a march, but then they get run down by cavalry, and there's the whole big fight in the city there, all of that stuff. And then gradually watching like the huge numbers of extras in these war scenes, and they're not generally like battle scenes. There's a little bit of that, but mostly it's, you know, from the perspective of our character who's a doctor. So he's not like on the front lines with a gun. He's the one that's taking care of people afterwards. And but then there's later we see, the family home has been claimed because part of the nature of this Bolshevik revolution is there's a lot of like, well, you had money. Well, guess what? Your big house can now fit, 8 families. So we're gonna force that to happen. And on the one hand, like the politics of this movie are kind of a mess. I think, like, you
It's
know,
it's well, I think I haven't read the book, but my
mm-hmm,
understanding of it is that that's kind of the point, is that it's
yeah,
taking shots at both.
mm-hmm,
That it's it's not idealizing the czar
right.
relationship, but it's certainly not saying this is the better,
Yeah,
like,
well, it's one of those things where, like, as presented in the movie, we have our main character, sympathetic guy, Omar Sharif, never been hotter. Like he's a charismatic guy in this movie, and he is our main character, and he verbally more than once expresses sympathetic views towards what the revolution is all about, like the idea that they maybe they have a point. There's been a lot of unfair treatment and that sort of thing, and yet at the same time, what's also depicted on screen is those people taking power and everything kind of just settling down into famine, and nobody can get anything done, and you get you know arrested and maybe executed for stealing firewood from the wrong pile, and people having to take starvation trains to hope that they can find a family somewhere that a farm somewhere where they can just live. Um,
yeah. So
yeah.
this, I
So
mean,
that doesn't seem. It's not
no,
presented as successful, essentially.
no, it's not meant. My
Mm-hmm.
again, my understanding. I haven't read the book, but
Yeah.
this is actually one of my father's favorite books,
Hmm.
um, because of the parallels to the Cuban Revolution, which,
Hmm.
he was 13 when it happened. But there's a lot of very similar things, like when they decided to leave, even though they were just on a temporary travel visa, like the government knew they were leaving. So they came in and they inventoried their whole house because they were going to take it back for the party, because my family
Mm-hmm.
lived in a nice neighborhood in Havana. So it was going to go to some military leader of, or 8 families or whatever they were going to do with it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things, and the, having to, but what is different about this, and I think what kind of struck him, is like they had the escape valve of being able to just go to the US, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
as many Cubans did. There wasn't anywhere, like obviously they're trying to get to Germany and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that, but this is like, Russia's a big place. Like there's not a lot
Yeah.
of places for the people who don't want to be there to go,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's part of
Well,
what
not to mention there
yeah,
was also the fact that they were having to be smuggled out. It's not like they were even allowed to go to Germany if they wanted. It's
yeah,
no one was allowed to leave.
right. And that was eventually, that's how Cuba ended up. But at the
Mm.
beginning, it was, if you had money and you had the means, you could get to the U.S. and the U.S. would take you in, and that was sort of a different thing. Um, so anyway, but I think it is worth. And I don't want to speak, like I said, I don't want to speak as an expert on the book because I haven't read it. I
Mm-hmm.
just know that the book had much more like of that in it, right? Like
Yeah.
that was part of what made it. It's why this movie shot in Spain, right?
Mm.
Because they couldn't get into Russia because this is a very controversial book in Russia. Now, if
Right.
it was just as, again, I mean, it's not goofy, but if it was as simplistic as the movie is showing, like, the Russians wouldn't really have that big of a problem with it. But the fact
Right.
is, it kind of takes, the book itself takes some shots at all of it, and
Yeah.
they don't necessarily like that part of it.
Well, I can imagine, and I would imagine that in a book, certainly one like as kind of well known historically as that one, probably there's a lot more nuance in the expression of the political ideas in it and what it's trying to say. And I think in the movie, all of that stuff gets blunted is maybe not quite the right word. It's more like it's slightly out of
Forrest
alignment.
Gump.
Hmm?
Forrest Gumped.
It's made clumsy, I
I
think.
mean, it does. It like I know it's kind of a joke, but it is sort of like that,
Mm,
right? Like
yeah,
without being as overt as Forrest
right.
Gump was.
It's kind
Like
of like here's a tour of all of these historical events during this time period.
right, and they're just using Zhivago instead of Forrest, right?
Yeah.
Like
Hmm. Hmm.
it's
Right.
like
And but at the same, yeah. So I think I only hesitated when you said that, just because that in my head is almost more negative than I feel like it is with this. Now, that said, I can imagine someone who loves the book for that element of it um, might watch the movie and feel like, they kind of, you know, didn't have that laser focus on that part of it in order to focus more on the love story. I could imagine that being a fair criticism.
I mean, the love story is obviously a critical part of the book. I mean, that
Yeah.
is what it is the through, because
Hmm.
and you can almost and just
Well.
think if you think about like even the way that the story's framed,
Hmm.
you can see how that works better in a book,
Yeah.
with the daughter, and we're being introduced to the daughter in the labor camp. Like we don't know she's his daughter, right? But
Hmm.
that's the beginning of it, and then to the his death when he sees Laura and he gets so excited that he has a heart attack and dies before he can catch her, and
Mm.
then she goes
I
to his
I will
funeral.
say I really had to squint for that last bit to not break the spell for me, because I loved the movie. I really liked all the melodrama of the love story, but yeah, the ending where he actually does manage to find her again. He sees her across the street, but his heart's been failing. We learned 3 sentences in the script earlier, and he can't catch up with her, and he has a heart attack and dies without her ever realizing it. And like I was enthralled with the movie enough that I was able to kind of go, okay, yeah, all right. But that definitely felt like one of the cheesier moments.
Right, and then but then she goes to his funeral. She starts looking for his daughter,
Hmm.
thinks that she must have died in a labor camp, like as far as she can figure out. Like, and then we go back to the story being told in the labor camp,
Hmm.
and it turns out that the girl can play the whatever the specific guitar type instrument,
Yeah,
um, that her fiance says that she's very
so
well, very
talented. Yeah.
super talented at it, which her mother was also
Hmm.
talented at it. So we realize, I mean, it's saying that she's the daughter,
Well,
but it
I
doesn't really
like.
go anywhere with that. Like it's just
Well,
like, oh,
well,
this is
I
his
I
daughter.
actually
Yeah.
really loved that piece of it though, because it was Zhivago's mother who was really good at
Right,
that
right.
instrument. He never learned to play it, but he kept the instrument just out of his affection for her.
That's right. No, that is a good point.
Yeah, and so the fact that she seemed to be naturally talented at it, I think was for. So we haven't even mentioned him, but Alec Guinness plays Zhivago's brother, sort of. The brother that he never sees except officially in various business capacities from time to time. It's a little bit strange, but whatever. In any case, he's the guy that's in the framing device looking for Zhivago's daughter. I did not recognize him in that first bit. Like I
Really?
did once we saw him like in the main story, but when he was in the old age makeup for the framing device, I didn't recognize him in that first one. Like once I realized who he was, I figured it out. But it's like it's actually just a funny coincidence that uh, you know we, without realizing it, in addition to picking all of these David Lean movies to talk about, we also have picked exclusively ones that Alec Guinness are in, because he's in all of them.
Yeah, I guess I did realize that, and you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I would I was kind of curious to look back and do like a one for one, to like what percentage of David Lean movies is Alec Guinness in. Seems high based on our random sampling.
Does.
Either that, or it's just that he is the indicator of when it's going to be one of the better movies or not. I don't know. In any case, yeah. So that the idea that she's naturally gifted at this instrument that Zhivago's mother was naturally gifted at is all the more for him like an indicator of, oh, okay, definitely the genetic connection there. Even if I wasn't already pretty sure, that seems like just the perfect little bow on top in terms of being absolutely sure. And I liked the end of it. Like, is what was that last line? It was something like, it's a gift then, or something like that.
Right. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was
Something,
something like that, though.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I really liked that ending. I was very happy with that ending. Even though I had to strain a little bit for the cheesiness of you know the manufactured drama of he gets that close to seeing her again, but has a heart attack.
Yeah. But so yes, so I like the ending too. But you can see even though it does play here, you can see how that, like, I don't know, just that feels
Hmm.
more like a way a good novel like
Yeah,
plays out,
yeah.
right? With the
Oh,
way
for
that
sure.
that device works better there. So
Hmm.
you, and the point I'm saying this is that I believe that some of these, you know, some of the criticisms of this have been because people really liked the novel, and then, but that's, at least again, I'm speaking for my father here, but he always liked this because he felt like it paid enough of an homage to what was in the novel
Hmm.
that he could get the enjoyment just remembering what he read in the book without having to reread the book, but you still get these cool
Hmm.
epic like scenes of hiking through the mountains, in, even if it's because you're impoverished, like, I mean, there is still some epic landscapes in here that really
Hmm.
give this story
Oh yeah.
like some texture that you can't write about and isn't in a normal love story. So
Hmm.
it just, it's a complicated, it just sits in a complicated
Oh yeah.
place
I mean,
in the,
there's
yeah.
a lot to chew on in this, even if a lot of this other stuff is more set dressing for the love story than commentary about the situation more generally. But like the whole sequence where they're trying to flee by train and they've got like what, like 50 people in this one train car, to the point where it's like there is barely enough room to physically even fit this many people in the train car, like to the point where like they have these like 6 deep, very small bunk bed cubby things, and there is literally not enough room for everybody to not be in the bed, right? Like you can only have like 4 or 5 people out of those cubbies at a time, when the train is going, and they don't like they don't linger on it, but they also don't shy away from some of the factors that would come into play with a long train trip of that type, talking about like hygiene and food and that sort of thing and how do they manage. But then even from there, we have this motif of Zhivago being kind of it's always the sunset, right? Where he's kind of drawn, like when he sees the sun setting behind trees or something, he's always kind of almost like mesmerized to go want to go look at it, and it gets him into trouble almost every time. Because the train has stopped for a little while and he decides to just stretch his legs, and he walks a little farther into the forest than he should, only to accidentally encounter the train that this other military general is on, that happens to be Pasha. And and it's just like a whole thing. And then later, that's where he gets abducted by the other side, is also when he was just like going through the woods. That one was just extra terrifying though, because he had literally, so the scenario was his pregnant wife Tanya is waiting for him to come back with supplies, but he decides to make one last trip to go visit Laura, his girlfriend, and gets abducted on the way back. So his pregnant wife, as far as she's concerned, just disappeared. But then I loved later that we just skip over all of what happened after, which is in wondering where he is, she comes into town asking about him, finds out about the affair, comes to peace with it, and leaves a message for him there. And he just finds out all of that once he finally escapes from these soldiers that took him. He, like, that whole thing that has played out already in his absence.
Yep.
I thought that was amazing. I really liked that element of the story. Not least because in the romance angle, it basically gives him carte blanche to just go ahead and be with Lara, who he loves most. You know,
Right.
it's like,
I think
don't worry, Tanya and kids are okay elsewhere, far away, and basically thumbs up, you're good. Which is obviously overstating, but the point, just from the romantic standpoint, we have this middle section where it's an illicit affair, right? You
yep.
know, it's behind Tanya's back, but then later we get the last act where it's like, they're on the run, but they have permission. Essentially, it's not cheating anymore.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it is. It's told in an interesting way in that, like, it sort of it kind of comes apart as the well, I guess it wasn't the Soviet Union, it was becoming the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
But as the Russian government is coming apart, like, so is sort of their thing.
Yeah.
Like when they were together, it was, they were in the big house, and it was all this, you know,
Mm-hmm.
part of this high society. But like what starts it down is when that house starts to get occupied and taken for the government, like, and all these
Right.
things sort of kind of happen together, right? And the reason he's out seeing Laura all the time is because it keeps getting like drawn into this war and
Mm.
into this, all these pieces of it. And so
Well,
it's sort of
right. Like,
follows that in a weird way, right? Yeah.
it's also, I can't remember if they ever say it explicitly, but I think we can certainly intuit that the family probably would have gone to Europe if he had been on board with that early
Yes.
on. They would
Yeah.
have left if he was wanting to do that.
I believe that. And I think that's where I was going to kind
Yeah.
of land, is that that's part of why Tanya makes peace with all of this, is that,
Mm-hmm.
like, their marriage had kind of fallen apart regardless of the Laura thing, like, just
Yeah.
the fact that this is how society in Russia was,
Mm-hmm.
and he wanted to still be a part of it, and she didn't want her family there. And so that's part of the piece, is like, well, now I have permission to
Yeah.
move to Paris with our kids,
Well,
and you can stay in the chaos with Laura, right?
right. Well, and I think it's
And we're
interesting.
all okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, like, we get it very early on in the movie. There's indication that she kind of knows there's something up there. Like, even before there even really is something, right? Because, like, before they ever actually start a relationship, there's a whole lot of stuff going on back and forth because, like, Lara tries to assassinate this political official, this party official at a big party that Dr. Zhivago is at. And basically, he barely manages to get her out the door before she's mopped to death. Um, and it's just like there's a whole lot of stuff going on there. Um, Actually, I take it back. Pasha's who gets her out of the party, right? Like, he's there, he
Yes.
sees it happen, but Pasha shows up to escort her out.
Yeah. Zhivago and her don't meet up until she becomes like his nurse or
Right?
whatever.
Yeah. Well, and even then,
Well,
they don't start the relationship then because it's like there's clearly chemistry, but they don't do anything about it until they meet again after that.
right. And that's where, like I said, it kind of follows, because that's just the regular war, right? And that's so
Mm-hmm.
it started to brew there. And it's when he leaves, that is when he goes home, and that's when their home has been
Mm-hmm.
confiscated, and her family is trying to leave, but he's still trying to be a part of it. Like, that's how it all kind of starts to
Yeah.
break apart,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
So, in any case, lots of great set pieces in this that just contribute to this whole thing. The feeling of this epic scope of it all, even if, like, the emotional stakes are really just with this respect, very small story, all things considered, right? But against this big backdrop, it's kind of the emotional storytelling equivalent of one of those huge landscape shots where the people are just tiny little specks in it. It's like, we're telling this big story, but it's against all of this happening. The idea of just this one piece is one of the things that happens during all of this. And we get so many cool things. Like the one other thing I guess that I'm trying to get around to, and I keep just not going straight there, is um, I had heard about it, but the magic of them finally going into the fancy farmhouse and it's all like frozen and ice covered inside
That's a cool scene.
did not disappoint. Like, I had heard people talk about that, but hadn't really like seen it. And then when it actually showed up, I'm like, yeah, no, I get it. I get it. It's incredible. It's
Yeah,
just really
there's
well
like
done.
literally three images that if you had to say like just like if you just mentioned Dr. Zhivago to me, it's that one.
Mm-hmm.
It's just literally trains,
Hmm.
non-specific, just trains.
Yeah.
And then the part where he's trying to march home on foot
Oh
through
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like just that one. Those are the three most impactful things of this. And like I said, I know the train one's kind of non-specific, but it happens a lot. There's a lot of
Well,
trains.
yeah. There's a lot of trains.
There's a lot of trains. Yeah.
But yeah. So I feel like I was really glad to finally get around to this one. But I definitely agree with everything you said. It's like, as much as I loved watching it, what it is a very expensive, very good looking, sappy romance.
Yes.
Yeah. As opposed to like the masterpieces that we've kind of talked about with Lawrence of Arabia and Bridge on the River Kwai. It's like it's it's epic in a lot of the same production, but the story, I think, ultimately it doesn't, at least as presented, it doesn't have the same weight as those two do.
Yeah, it doesn't quite click in all of the ways. And the last character I'll talk about like that kind of exhibits that for me, where you can see where the misses are,
Mm-hmm.
is Pasha.
Mm.
Because I mean, what a phenomenal character to tell that part of the story of, that he doesn't like the way that Russia is, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
he's this young upstart, very smart guy, got his beautiful wife that, he's, but it turns out because of the way that this society is, like she's had to do all these things that he's not happy with and not proud
Mm-hmm.
of, but he loves her anyway. And it's like conflicted, but he wants to be a part of this revolution.
Yeah.
And
True
then
believer.
right, true believer. But by the end, like he's changed his name to be like Strenikov or whatever it is.
Mm.
Like, he's got like this hardcore name, and he's got
Mm-hmm.
places where guards are out
Yeah.
capturing people on his behest, and he's deeming who is and isn't a threat. And like the corruption that he goes through, to the point where he doesn't even give a shit about his wife anymore. Like,
Right.
he
Yeah.
tells Yuri how to go find her. Like,
He. Yeah.
yeah.
This idea that he's a true believer of the revolution, um, being for the people, which I do finger quotes for, because that is kind of ultimately like the development for him, is that he remains so steadfastly committed to like the cause in purely abstract terms that he later in the story justifies as acceptable the burning of the wrong town because it sends the right message anyway, even if it wasn't the town that actually did what they were being punished for.
Right. And so, yeah, this guy gets corrupted absolutely by whether it's the belief or the power or some combination of both. And but
Mm-hmm.
that's the
Oh,
thing, is like he exists in this story, but there's not, it's, you can see why this is difficult. It's hard to like take this movie and take that theme, which is a big part of the theme,
mm-hmm.
and like make it real through film, right? It's a hard one to get.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that anybody else would have gotten this better than David Lean. I
Yeah.
think this was
Well,
just one of those things where we enjoy what we enjoy from it. The
Yeah.
people who did read the book and like the book for the reasons that it exists, like they enjoy that, and we enjoy this for what it is, and
Yeah. I
don't
think
want for more. Yeah,
I think compared to some of the other, like certainly Lawrence and Bridge on the River Kwai, like I think part of the difference, like first of all, I think Bridge on the River Kwai is great. This is not a diss on it, but it is not epic in the same way that this or Lawrence are, right? Like it's set in primarily one location. If you leave out the American travelogue parts of it, but it's telling a relatively focused story of the prisoners at this one camp and what
right.
they're doing, right? That's primarily what it's about. And then Lawrence of Arabia does have this epic story, but it's always about Lawrence's part of it. We're always with him. We're not jumping around to different people, right? Um, and even when there's times that he is not literally in the scene, it is when other characters are talking about him.
Right.
So like it's focused in that way. And I think that's maybe what this one is missing in that regard, is that the love story stays focused, but it doesn't really always feel related to the war story, except in how it is buffeted by the war story, right? The connection is only one way.
Yeah, like Lawrence is actually like choosing to be a part of the wars and the revolutions and the
Yeah.
shaping of the Middle East, right? Like,
Well, and that's even like part of the theme is him making what is in some ways a strange choice.
yes. And so yeah, you're right. I mean, you can see where they're trying to do the same things. Like they took another bigger than life, charismatic actor in Omar Sharif to, because
and
that's what
and
carries
he's
Lawrence,
great.
right?
Like, yeah, I mean, like he's great in this
He's
movie.
great. Yeah. I mean, he does what his part is, which is that every time he's on screen, like you're drawn to him,
Yeah.
right? Which
Oh,
is what
such his eyes, man. He just got these dark, intense eyes that he's great. He's so good in this. Like
they
he's
happen to
I
look really good in
yeah
sunsets.
yeah
So that's why they put him, why they have him pondering life in sunsets frequently.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, this gets this wistful look, like yeah. But in any case, yeah. So I think like obviously we're not talking about the book, so maybe the connection works better there. But I think that's the piece that maybe like if we were to try to say what is this one lacking that say Lawrence of Arabia has, I think it's that piece is that we certainly see how by taking place during this war, the war has an impact on the love story just by virtue of the outside world interfering with what's going on.
Right.
But it doesn't feel like there's any connection the other way. It feels almost coincidental.
Yeah, like he's you have this person, this bigger than life personality that you're following, but
Mm-hmm.
he's a passenger in the war part.
Right.
His story is about trying to find the woman he loves.
Yeah.
For Lawrence, like he is an active part of like the war story, and it's like to your
Oh
point, like
yeah.
it's an odd thing, like how he's so driven to like shape this thing, and how
That's
he is this lightning rod over there, like that. It just
yeah.
it's more of a compelling story,
You
right?
you just nailed it, I think, for me, because it is like in Lawrence, he is active. He is putting himself out there. He's doing things. He's affecting the situation. Whereas in Doctor Zhivago, we are given a framing device that suggests that ultimately the impact that occurs is that during this time that we get near the end of the movie, he writes this book of poetry that becomes this big, huge cultural impact. And that's supposed to be the connection. But the problem is, we really don't get to hear any of that poetry for the most part. Like, we hear a line or two. And to be fair, like, I get it's hard to, without writing a work of genius poetry to describe, oh, yeah, he wrote this piece of genius poetry.
Yeah.
Well, everybody knows it. We don't have to read it. You know it already. Let's just, yeah, what time is it? Um, but the but yeah, so like that's supposed to be the connection of how their story did make a difference to the broader context, except that it's still also circumstantial. We only hear about it in the framing device, and I feel like they don't necessarily completely sell it there because it doesn't, like other than the fact that at first he is seen as someone whose political ideas would be frowned upon, his poetry would be banned, and you shouldn't read it. But now they can, and some people we meet say they like it. That's really all we get from there.
Yeah.
But in any event, I'm only getting into all of that just because I kind of wanted to kind of just try to look at it from the perspective of what is it that separates this one from, say, Lawrence of Arabia.
Mhm.
But all that under all that considered, I still loved the movie. I really enjoyed watching it. It is long, but it just trucks right along. I was not bored.
Yeah, you never
Um,
get bored. Yeah.
yeah, it's paced really well. There's lots of stuff that happens. It looks cool when it does. It's a good movie.
Yes.
Yep. All
Yeah.
right.
Like I said before, I understand. I will never make an argument to put this movie in the top 100,
Yeah, yeah.
but I do like this movie. I have always enjoyed watching it.
Hmm.
It has
Well, it's
cool
funny to
stuff in it. Yeah.
phrase it like that only just in the context of there are movies in the top 100 AFI list. I would put this over some of those. But in the abstract of saying what would my top 100 of all time be, I probably wouldn't put it there. But it's also like, of the list that other people made, there were some of the movies on there that, we didn't especially like, and so probably would bump off those, but in any case. Um, okay, so what do you think? Are we done with Dr. Zhivago? Shall we move on?
Yeah, I think we've accurately covered how we feel
Mm-hmm.
about it, and hopefully anybody who's listening who's on the fence about watching it, watch it. Just watch
Yeah,
it and make
yeah.
your own conclusions. I think you'll enjoy it. It
Mm-hmm.
is, but it does have some things where you're like, yeah, all right,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm along for the ride. I'm
I
good.
I think the thing that is gonna a lot of people would worry about is just that it's long, and I get it. Like that does make it sort of something you have to almost plan your day around.
But
But
it's
it
so
doesn't it doesn't feel long. It doesn't feel boring. It's not slow.
right, and it's not the other thing with it because it's not so it's immersive, but not so immersive that you can't like you could easily stop this at the intermission point and just pick it up the next
Oh
day.
yeah,
Like
totally.
you're not gonna feel like you left yourself like, oh, I
Yeah,
just gotta know what happens. Like I'm in the Zhivago world, like
yeah,
Lawrence. Like that one's hard, right? Like when it hits
yeah.
intermission, it's hard to like pull yourself out of that world,
Well,
right?
the intermission in Lawrence is also just like the first half and second half are almost two entirely different movies, right? They go together, but they have a very different feel, the two of them.
Yes.
This one, it's really more of a stopping point. But I'm just going to go ahead and maybe toss this out there. Hey, filmmakers, bring back the intermission. I mean, I guess I get why they don't, but it's like as there was this whole pressure of like making movie times shorter allows theaters to show more showings per day, but movies have been trending longer already again anyway, and so now we have 3.5 hour movies where you don't get a break in the middle.
Which you should. Like that's how plays are written.
Yeah.
Like you
Mm-hmm.
don't. I think,
Yes.
which we're getting a little bit off on the tangent here, but I think part of it is that there is more of an acceptance of just getting up and going in and out of a theater
Yeah.
just whenever you feel like it or need to. Whereas traditionally, the movies did play more like the theater where you didn't leave,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that would upset someone else's view or whatever. Like nobody cares anymore, right? Like if you want to, but yeah, there's definitely movies I would have liked an intermission
Yeah.
because there's times where I need to go get another
We
soda
all
or go to
exist
the
within
restroom.
frail
Yeah,
human bodies, and
yes, we have
sometimes those bodies have needs that
yeah
are, must
hunger,
take
thirst.
priority. Yeah.
Yeah, other
Um,
things, and
yeah.
yeah, and sometimes you miss part of a movie where you
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have to if it had an intermission.
Yep.
So I
Mm-hmm.
anyway,
Anyway, but so let's then as this is kind of how we had decided these movies originally was we said Dr. Zhivago, okay, what else? And then we said, well, what are some of David Lean's other movies that maybe don't get talked about as much? And we realized that there were in 1945 and 46 respectively a pair of Charles Dickens adaptations, Oliver Twist and Great Expectations. Which of those should we do first, you think?
uh,
I
chronologically, Expectations was released first,
That
so
makes the most sense, I guess. Although I watched them in the reverse order, but I think chronologically makes good. So, I because I can't not, I'm gonna just jump right out and say that in this movie, the character of 21-year-old Pip is played by a 38-year-old actor, and it was very distracting for the entire runtime. This is not something that usually bothers me, but it was just especially egregious here. And it's not even like he's a young looking 38. I mean, when I looked up his age, I was like, no, no, yeah, that looks about right. And it's just, and his buddy, played by Alec Guinness, doesn't look 21 either, although he looks a little better. I think he's only 30, like 32 or something. But I just mean it's like that Simpsons gag of like the guy playing a high school student, and then when he smiles, you see all these wrinkles around his eyes. I mean, except literally true. All right.
yeah. I mean, it's what was I mean the big was it Luke Perry on 90210
Yeah.
where he was like 35 or
Mm.
whatever when that started, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer he was but and was like at the same time, but was he a kid in that one, the movie?
Uh. Oh,
He was
in the
adult.
movie, yeah, he was a student, a high school student, yeah. No,
He was
I
yeah,
take it back. He might not have been a high school student. He was because I don't think we ever saw him at school. He's like a townie or something, but I think he's certainly meant to be that age, like 20 or something.
right, but he was like 36 then,
Mm,
like or whatever. But yeah, it's the same kind of thing.
yeah.
But yes, it
Well,
is
but I guess
awful.
what I'm just saying is that I don't usually find myself bothered by that, but this one did for, whatever. What are you going to do? So, that aside, just because it was just this blinking red light that if I didn't mention it, I would be thinking about when to mention it. Um,
Which is fine. Yeah.
so, here's the thing that I was a little bit surprised to realize for myself was that as much as I felt like I knew for both Great Expectations and Oliver Twist, for as much as I felt like I knew the story already, I realized I don't think so. I haven't read either book, and I don't think I've ever seen a movie of either one before at all. So it's technically my first exposure to the whole story instead of just hearing it in bits and pieces for
Interesting.
for both of
Yeah.
them, which kind of surprised me to realize because I just sort of hadn't thought about it. But
So I'm not 100% sure I've ever read Oliver Twist. I don't think I have. I think I only know it like via this movie.
mm-hmm.
I've definitely read Great Expectations, and that's basically my summation of like this movie
Mm-hmm.
is an for it is an incredible retelling of a story. Like I know we were talking a lot. I like it kind of framed with the Zhivago thing, which I unfortunately, like I said, I haven't read. I'm
Mm.
talking through people who have read it,
Sure, sure.
but how the tough part about adapting that, like this basically delivers everything you get when you read Great Expectations, and kind of the feeling that you have, and the the terror that exists with the convict, and then the weird transition to understanding that now he's the benefactor, and like how that, like at least for me, like the way that unfolds and feels in this movie of, and the way it kind of plays with society, like but still tells an interesting story
Mm-hmm.
and kind of takes again some shots at like how society is done and whether it's right or wrong. Like you I feel like I leave this movie with the same way I felt leaving the book.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an incredible feat here, which again we were just not knocking David Lean, but like talking about the challenges in that last
Mm-hmm.
movie. Well, this is one where, at least from my perspective, having experienced this story from both, I feel like this is a very, very true delivery.
Yeah. Well, I liked it. Other than being distracted by the lead actor, I definitely liked it. So, just for anyone else who has not encountered the Great Expectations story, you've probably, like I had, heard little bits and pieces of references to it there, maybe without even realizing that that's what was being referenced to. But the basic story here is we've got a young kid named Pip. He's nicknamed Pip because he has a whole spiel about why he's called Pip. It's not important.
It's
Um, but
it's Philip.
yeah, um, but in any case, we meet him as a kid where he works. What is his? Is it just a? What is his? It's like because it's not his dad, right? With the family he lives with at the beginning. No, his
No,
parents are
he's
dead, but
interning with the blacksmith.
the
It's
blacksmith, right? The blacksmith
right.
who is
It's
married to
like
his older sister,
yeah, and it's not like intern. He's not an intern. He's a
apprentice.
apprentice. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
So blacksmith is the missing piece that I was going for there. But in any case, he's living there, and he is accosted in a graveyard when he's going to visit his parents' graves. He's accosted by an escaped convict who is very scary and demanding of him, but Pip is nonetheless able to kind of see the humanity inside. And even though partly it's about being scared of being threatened by an escaped convict, he also does decide to not only bring him the food and metal file he requested, but to not tell anybody that he saw him. And then, even though that guy gets caught later, there's a moment where that guy specifically recognizes, "Hey, kid, you did me a good turn that you didn't have to do. You believed in me in a way that's really like means something to me."
Well,
Like,
yeah. Well, I think just to clarify on there, I'm pretty sure I remember he only asked him to bring the file. He chose to bring him the food, which was sort of the above and beyond that like the convict recognized.
you
It was
might be
like
right. I had thought he asked for both, but certainly he doesn't just bring him food. He brings the big fancy meat pie that they only had in the house because the guest had brought it for their dinner that night.
right. So
So,
yeah, so there is a little bit of above and beyond. It's not just the
yeah.
not telling. Like he
Mm-hmm.
he definitely like leans into the humanity and helping this guy,
Well,
right?
and it's not even just the action of it. Like it's clear that there's a recognition. Like he asks about him, like if he's okay. He seems like genuinely to treat him like a human being and not a monster.
Right.
And that means something to that guy, which seems like an entirely unrelated anecdote until later in the story. Because then we just skip forward. We have, just by sheer coincidence, we have a lady named Mrs. Haversham who was so traumatized.
Miss
Ms.
Haversham.
Well, because I guess technically she didn't actually get married, did she?
Yeah, she was a spinster. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not merely a spinster, but she was so traumatized because, like, was left at the altar, right? That's
Yes.
what the whole deal was. And so she's so traumatized by that she has literally never set foot outside her house since then, and doesn't even especially keep it up. She has the rotting wedding cake still sitting on the table where she hangs out all the time. She is
Yeah.
clearly bonkers, and she has also adopted a young girl to act as a surrogate daughter that she can pour all of her man hating and bitterness into. And then from there decides, hey, where's a local young kid that I can bring over here to get abused by my adopted daughter?
Yeah, this is all what happens. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, like it's frankly a bizarre story. Um, And like the only reason she gets away with any of this stuff is because she is very rich and is dangling that inheritance at the end of a string for all of her relatives, and they are indulging her because they're hoping to inherit when she dies. Um, but that is how Pip meets, uh, what becomes a love interest of sorts. Certainly not a conventional one, um, but also how he, by coincidence, meets his best friend, who will later be played by Alec Guinness when they grow up. Uh,
Herbert. Okay.
yeah.
Yep.
Um, who is a great character. Um, who is just immediately endearing because, like, when he first shows up, he's this incredibly scrawny, pampered, pasty little rich kid who promptly sees Pip and says, "Okay, we're gonna fight now. I'm gonna take off my shirt and we're gonna fight. Put up your dukes." And Pip is just like, "What are you talking about?" And essentially defends himself by landing an actual hit, bloodies the Herbert's nose, and Herbert's like, "Oh, yeah, all right, come on, let's try one more time." Gets just laid out again, and then says, "That was great, see ya." And then years later, it's like, "Hey, I remember you." Um, but and it becomes essentially, briefly a source of tension, but then ultimately a steadfast ally, and he's a great character. I like him. And I believe it was the youngest I've ever seen Alec Guinness. I don't think I've seen him in anything younger than he was in this one, which is kind of interesting. You can tell it's him though. Um, so I guess I'm telling the story pretty beat by beat here, I guess, but
I mean,
all
it's kind of how it's delivered.
yeah.
It's
Well, it's a very serialized, right? Because that's how it was originally written by Dickens, right?
right. It was written as a serial. And
Mm-hmm.
it's meant to, because I mean this is like these two books are like the Dickensian, like where
Yeah.
that like phrasing came from,
Right. Right.
talking about like the the difference between like the haves and the have-nots, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this whole thing is about. And
Right.
so that's why Miss Haversham is like such an eccentric, like rich person,
Mm-hmm.
because he's essentially poking fun at the fact that like people will tolerate like the most absurd behavior if you're
Mm-hmm.
rich,
Yeah.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's so it's laying a foundation for what's going to be delivered later, which is that when Pip graduates, like he now has a benefactor who's
Mm-hmm.
going to, teach him to, not
Well,
teach that
well,
person's
so
not going
that
to teach him to be a
sponsor
gentleman,
him, like
right?
sponsor.
Sponsor
Yeah.
him to go and become a gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
We assume, because of what we've seen, it's the eccentric Miss Haversham.
Right. Yeah. And so yeah, so Pip is told someone very fancy with a lot of money has decided to spend some of that money in order to allow you to move to London and learn how to be a gentleman and have an allowance and see all the right people and buy better clothes and do all of those things. And Pip's conclusion, which seems at the time to be the most obvious answer, is that it's Miss Havisham that's doing it, and furthermore, that she is doing it in order to make Pip a better suitor for what's her name, the girl, right?
Stella.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's his assumption of what's happening, even though the lawyer has been given explicit instructions that he cannot say who it is.
Right.
Which
But
all
that's
seems
the only
very
rich person
strange,
he
but what do
knows.
you know?
Right. Yeah.
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 But
It's the
then,
only
of
rich
course,
person he knows. Yeah.
yeah. But then what we eventually learn is that it's not her at all. It's it's in fact this convict who Pip helped years ago, who managed to escape to Australia and become very wealthy there.
Sheep farming.
Yeah, but the reason it was prohibited to, like, you can't say who it is because he's technically still wanted for murder in
Yep.
London. And if it was known that that was the source of his money, it would ruin everything. And so that like and so now and we learned this because he shows back up anyway. And so now it's like, oh, hey, Mr. Very Scary Person that I was uncommonly decent to years and years ago. Now you're basically my foster dad, but also you're wanted for murder. What's up? Oh, by the way, this is my roommate, who I'm sure will be very cool with all of this.
And but that's what it's like it's all of these things that are kind of absurd are the point of the
Yeah.
story.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's meant to kind of poke fun at how weird it is that like there's these societies and that like you can be a part of it, but
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, but if you did it this way and you're not here, then you can't be, and you've got to hide it. And then,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact, like I said, that everybody tolerates this friggin' bizarre woman who only
Well,
adopted the girl, like you said, to
mm-hmm.
to go and hurt boys and to like make up for the fact that she was hurt by a boy.
Mm.
And we even learn like
I, you
Pip
know,
goes and like tries to like hang out with her, and she's like, well, I'm gonna be with this other dude. I don't like him, but that's kind of my job, right? Is just
mm,
be with this guy, right?
yeah.
And all these things are so bizarre, you know.
Well, like, I think my favorite part, honestly, is Pip, once he knows the truth, taking a moment to recognize that for, I don't know, it's a period of it, like a couple of years, it's meant to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where Mrs. Haversham has been letting him think that it is her, even if she won't actually say it. She led him on. Like, he jumped to that conclusion, but she realized what was happening, that it wasn't her, but let him think it was anyway. And once he realizes that not only wasn't it her, so there wasn't actually that, because he was able to put up with all of her nonsense because in the back of his mind he's saying, but she's also paying for all of this. So I guess I can deal with that. But then to discover that not only wasn't it her, but that she deceived him through lies of omission, he goes back to confront her about that. And I thought that was fantastic. That
Yeah,
he's
because
actually saying, WTF, not okay.
right, because part of his like what was embedded in his assumption is like what you
Mm-hmm.
said is that she is doing this so that he can be at a level to marry Stella.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then when he finds out that no, Stella is like, no, I'm marrying a guy that I don't like because that's my job. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
here to just screw people over.
Mm-hmm.
And that just sets Pip off. He's like, wait a minute, not only like are you lying, like I just learned that you were lying about
Mm-hmm.
funding me, but also Stella doesn't want to be with me because she just wants to hurt people. Like, and you let me believe all of these things, and then it ends in this really bizarre thing where the first time Miss Haversham gets up in her like all the time that we've seen her, like she trips over the firewood and like sets herself on fire. Like
Yeah.
it's really weird.
It's weird, but I thought it was weird in an amazing way. Like, literally,
Yes.
it's an incredible sequence, and that maybe this is why you cast a 38-year-old, because the nonverbal performance of him, he has just left the room after this whole confrontation, does not see that she has set herself on fire. He does not know that. But what he hears is her basically yelping in like dismay, alarm, pain. We know to be pain because she set herself on fire, but he doesn't know that. And there's just this moment of, should I go back? She's probably just still trying to get into my head. Oh, and he's conflicted. And he starts to go, and then she screams again. No, he has to run back up because he's a good guy. Even if he's so mad at her, he can't live with the idea that maybe she does actually need help. And of course, she did actually need help. And the truth is, he was too late, and we don't know if he might have not been too late if he had responded the first time she screamed. Right? I thought that just the nuance in all of that was really really incredible. And I mean, a lot of that I'm sure is from the book, but I very well presented in for such a weird sequence of events to happen. It all plays out very plausibly on screen.
Yes.
I liked that a lot. I think it's considerably more effective than the whole boat sequence towards the end of this movie, um, where they're trying to get his real benefactor out.
Oh, when
Um,
trying to
to
smuggle them out in the boat or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they use rear projection to try to make it look like they're little rowboats getting, run down by this gigantic paddle wheel boat, and that they're kind of getting run under the wheels. And like I get that it's in mid 1940s, they don't exactly have complex CGI or whatever, but the whole thing feels a little unwieldy. I thought, um, so like it's kind of like it's okay, but doesn't not as effective as I there, and it's all a little bit weird too, just because I the motivations of this convict are always a little bit feel like what he wants to do most desperately is to complicate Pip's life as much as he possibly can in any given moment. Like, what is his character? His character is to create plot complications for Pip. um, I say that only just in the sense of like how demanding he is versus how self-sacrificing he is versus how good he is at staying quiet versus how much he feels like he needs to shout even in a situation where he shouldn't, and those sorts of things. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like, but and then there's a lot of business too. Well, so I think by the end it definitely starts feeling a hat on a hat, because we have the other prisoner who's ratting him out and working with the cops, and then the whole business about discovering, oh wait, Estella is actually apparently this guy's long lost daughter, and therefore should inherit all of his money, but that would also inherit the reputation of being the daughter of a murderer. And Pip tells the lawyer, he takes it upon himself to say, she must never be told. I will make this decision about whether or not she will inherit lots of money, because I believe that I know what's best for her reputation, and therefore she shouldn't even know that the decision was available. Um, I didn't love that.
I know, but it it's all done it's all rhetorical, right? Like it's
Mm.
not it's
I
this
agree. I don't want to over complain about that. It's more just kind of like some
right.
of that gets a little silly.
Yeah, but that's sort of the beat of how this thing works. Is it's not meant to be like Pip is his hero. Like
Hmm.
he's a character to rhetorically like poke holes at like this whole weird thing about society, and that
Hmm.
like that's a thing that you actually have to like that people are making decisions on of like, well, this money is this, but because of this and the reputation and blah blah, blah, like that's where this is like. And so yes, it's silly, but it's silly on purpose,
Hmm.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, the whole thing is a rhetorical like gut punch at like how high society operates, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So when you kind of take it as that, you can see why I mean the some of the beats feel a little weird, but
Hmm.
yeah.
I'm actually just looking at this poster for a moment, and looking at this uh, great thrills, great suspense, great adventure, and I'm just thinking about like I liked this story, but pretty much just like we're talking about what just that last sequence, really, right? I mean, it's not like there's a lot of action before that.
No, I mean there's the rills and when he meets the convict, I guess.
Hmm.
When they
Yep.
fight, I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's okay though. Yeah,
It's not all those things.
it's a
Yeah.
movie poster. But yeah, so you know, I I I was glad to have finally experienced the story. Um, I was able to grin and get past casting this middle-aged man as a As a 21-year-old. That's fine. I thought he did a well. He performed well enough. Like I thought that he did the role okay, but yeah. And then a lot of the set design, like like the interior of Haversham's manor, and just all of the ins and outs of the alleys in London, and all of that stuff. The lawyer's office, like everything looks great, right? This is you know it's a good looking movie for what it is. But yeah,
Yeah.
it at the same time, I think it's definitely not among the all time classics. I mean, I don't know that I can name a better adaptation of the movie. I know there's been several.
Yeah, I mean, this is for me. This is at least, like I said, like how I felt reading this book, like story.
Hmm.
This movie pretty much hits it spot on. Like it's a very beat by beat. Like I said, it's all rhetorical. Like it's told absurdly for a reason,
Hmm.
and like this movie delivers on that. Like I mean, and we shouldn't take back, like there's some small pieces that come at the very end that are actually like meant to be pretty important to like how the plot weighs out. Like
Hmm.
so when after all this like kind of deconstructs around Pip and he gets sick, like his blacksmith like
Hmm.
adopted father or whatever is the one that like brings him back to health. Like
Yeah.
that's who like he returns to like the good people who like raised him
Hmm.
after like flirting around in this like bizarre high
Well, right,
society.
because
Right?
obviously after the identity of his sponsor comes to light and the man is hanged for his murder, for the murder he committed, um, the money obviously dries up.
Right.
So he has to go back, but it's not framed as like, oh no, returned to rags from the riches. It's more like
This is the more
it's
normal
it's almost
place.
more like relief. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like, oh
exactly. This is better, right?
yes,
And then he
fine,
goes to Havisham's house, and then and you see, and Stella's there now, and she's becoming friggin' weird. And he's like, no, no,
right,
no, no, you like we need to break from this path, right?
yeah,
And so that's why he tears down all the curtains. It's like
mm-hmm,
that's symbolically saying, like, no, Stella, get yourself out of this world. Like you're
yeah.
not part of this,
And
right?
all of the dust and decay and rot that was able to kind of almost pretend it wasn't so bad when everything was dark in
Yep.
there, but it's
Yeah. When
just
the sun
so
comes,
obvious when
yeah.
the sun comes in, and it just ruins it. The morbid mystique of it. Um,
Yeah. So that, I mean, I feel like that is it's symbolic more than just like breaking like Havisham's house up. It's breaking the pattern that people fall into of like some these things are okay because you're rich and this is
mhm,
the standard. Like no, you can shake it up. Like Stella, you're not that. Like you are the daughter of this other guy who did all these other did things a different way, right? Like you can I love you for who you are and it's okay to be that person. Like let's tear these
mhm,
let's reveal some sunlight on how awful this lifestyle is,
yeah.
right? So I think those things are important, like as small as they kind of come at the end of it,
Oh yeah, yeah.
like the decency that's amongst the poor people that
Mhm,
Pip grew up with and the tearing down of the Havisham curse that's going about to like inflict Stella, I
mhm.
think are very very critical points to like how the story like
Well, right, and it pays off a bit from the middle that I think adds some nice nuance to it, where because there's the scene where things are still going pretty well for him, but the blacksmith comes to visit him in London. And it's obvious that he's bought new clothes to try to not look so common, but by the standards Pip has now become used to, he still looks pretty common, and he's embarrassed, and like in our voiceover, he's basically admitting I had become somewhat of a snob, and I was embarrassed to have him visit me. But then that's all paid off later when, the fundamental decency of the man wins out, and Pip recognizes how much more important that is than any of the other trappings that he had
yep,
started to, try to follow, pursue.
yep.
Hope Herbert still visits him. Comes out in a big fancy carriage. In any case, though, I like this. It was good to finally watch it. But I feel my voice starting to go, so let's go ahead and move on to Oliver Twist.
Gonna have a brief intermission.
Uh, sure.
Very quickly. I'm just gonna run
Okay. Well, I will briefly summarize the plot of Oliver Twist. How about that?
sounds good.
Okay, so Oliver Twist is another adaptation of a Charles Dickens serial, in which case we have the young Oliver Twist, who is a boy who grows up in an orphanage, where after being abandoned there, well, not abandoned, uh, at the beginning in the framing device, we see a mysterious young woman who shows up pregnant just in time to give birth and then, alas, die in childbirth. And this baby grows up to be Oliver Twist, who we learn eventually has, provenance to his parentage, but this is unknown to him at this time. He eventually manages to uh, get adopted out of this orphanage into the employ of a coffin maker, an undertaker. But then that does not go well, and he ends up homeless and taken into the employ of a man who is he's a fence basically. He sells stolen items and manages this whole cadre of children who all work as pickpockets under his advisement. And through all this process, we also meet Bill Sykes, who is basically just a very bad man who sometimes steals things and sells them to Fagin. And then there's a few other miscellaneous characters, but following Oliver through all of these adventures is this mysterious guy who's asking a lot of questions about him. And what we eventually discover is that Oliver's mother was, in fact, the daughter of a wealthy family. Is it ever explained why she ran away? I don't think it says in the movie. Like,
I don't remember that being covered.
in any case, in another one of these classic Dickensian serial coincidences, the kindly old man who sees Oliver randomly on the street and decides to adopt him turns out he is actually Oliver's grandfather. But this has to be proved by the location of this necklace, that this locket that his mother had on him when she died, but was stolen by one of the maids, and it's a whole big thing. But eventually, they start figuring out who Oliver must be. But unfortunately, he has now gotten himself involved with um, Bill Sykes, who has killed his girlfriend and is now on the run, and therefore takes Oliver as hostage, and it's a whole big climactic sequence. But it's a happy ending. Everyone's happy when Bill gets killed and Oliver's rescued, and he gets to go live and be rich.
So
I don't mean to have it be dismissive. I'm just like,
that
that's the
is
story.
basically
Yeah,
what happens.
yeah,
Like, there's not a whole lot more to it than that.
yeah. Well, one of the things I was actually thinking about it while watching it is, for being the title character, he's actually not in very much of the movie. Most of the runtime does not include him. He's in something like maybe a third of the scenes in this movie. Um, Now, to be fair, some of those other scenes are about him, even if he's not present. And I mean, maybe there's aspects of that too that are just related to, he's a kid. He's a This is not an example of casting someone who is much older than the part, because he looks like a kid. He is a kid, but that also sometimes means there's limited things that you can't always get the full range of performance you would like from a little kid. But I think he does pretty well, though, right? I mean, I think we've got a lot of great supporting actors here. I think the cast is over good, but I think one piece that we ought to touch on a little bit is Fagin, played by Alec Guinness again, but
This is probably
in
the most, yeah.
in perhaps this is another example of something where, on the one hand, you could so okay, without like trying to gild the lily here, Fagin is a pretty anti-Semitic stereotype of a character, and the presentation of him in this movie kind of leans into it rather than away.
Yes.
Um, in particular, Alec Guinness is in makeup with an extreme prosthetic
Aesthetic.
nose.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is designed, I guess, to look like a classic illustration from some publication of Oliver Twist, where the character's in silhouette and has a nose like that. But the thing is, it's one. There's always sometimes a temptation to say, "Oh well, product of its time or whatever." But the thing is, people told David Lean at the time that he was making the movie that he shouldn't do that because the character is already seen as controversial, and maybe not with the nose, but he did anyway because he was determined, and sure enough, people were upset. It delayed the release of the movie for 2 years in the United States, um, and I went down a whole little rabbit hole with this because apparently the concern about Fagin as an anti-Semitic stereotype goes literally all the way back to the original writing of the story, where people said the same thing to Charles Dickens about the character as the serial was being released. To the point where he literally, as the serial was coming out, like early in the book, he's always referred to as the Jew, and then later in the book stops calling him that because there was controversy at the time that it was being published. So again, it's not even the sort of thing where it's only when we look back on that. But it is kind of an ugly part of the whole thing, and it's one of those. As I was reading a bit about this, it's an example that I think is actually ultimately kind of a good one when we're talking about Charles Dickens specifically, because what we have from him, at least early on as he's writing the character, is that he didn't really intend it to be. He wasn't trying to write this stereotype, as because he was literally basing the character on a real guy from a newspaper article that he had read.
Right.
But it's also true that that newspaper article was kind of sensational because it was playing up the stereotypical aspects of a real guy, right? Eh? So, but the point is, he wasn't trying to reinforce that stereotype. He's trying to portray an interesting character he had heard about. But then some of the friends in his life were saying, "Yeah, but have you written any other Jewish characters?" And that's where he's like, "Oh, yeah, okay. I guess I." And so he had in some of his later writings stuff where he actually like specifically um, he wrote positive Jewish characters into some of his later work, and had some of his writings where he actually looked back and he's like, boy, I was, I never intended harm, but I was pretty naive about some of those things. And so it's interesting to see that there was some of that reflection, even from Charles Dickens himself at that time. But given that, the fact that decades and decades later, we have another, adaptation of the movie where it's kind of like, no, let's just go ahead and lean right back into it. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think I remember reading that like one of David Lean's like absolutions of it was like, well, we never refer to him as Jewish in the screenplay.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, everybody gets what the stereotype is.
Yeah.
Like it's not just because you didn't call him that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so you're right. I mean, it's probably the biggest story of this movie, honestly, and even the book. I mean, this it's the story's fine. I mean,
Mm,
it's but I like Great Expectations a lot better.
mm,
I I think it I like how it tackles the classism and all the things that Dickens is trying to do,
mm-hmm.
um, and poke the holes. I think the sort of the absurdity and the rhetorical like way that Great Expectations is written, I don't know. I feel that one more.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
this is more of a very beat by beat, like here's just a story.
I liked I liked parts of this a lot. I was so here's the thing. I actually was not previously aware of these concerns with the Oliver Twist story. Like I knew in general that there was a character named Fagin who had kind of these all of these kids that went out and acted as pickpockets for him. Like I knew that part, and I was honestly kind of expecting to enjoy that segment of the story. It sounded fun, kind of con artisty and artful dodger and all of that sort of thing. And so like I really didn't know until like that character shows up, and I'm just like, oh man, what is that? And I looked it up, and it's like, oh, sure enough, yeah, I'm not the only one who's noticed this.
You're
This
not.
is,
It wasn't something you just realized. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so that kind of sours big chunks of that for me a little bit. But even beyond that, like I don't know. Like I don't know. I just like that whole section of the story just is weird feeling. Even I think separate from that concern about it. I think I was expecting the Artful Dodger to be more relevant, like a bigger part of the story. Because it seems like he's primed to be kind of a ally slash foil to Oliver, but then kind of nothing really comes of it ultimately. Um, they kind of just they screw Oliver over by leaving him behind when they're getting chased, even though that ultimately allows Oliver to get found by the person who randomly turns out to be his grandfather. Um, but it's still a here we're going to show you how it's done. Whoops, it didn't go well. We're running away. See ya. Too bad. Although I did enjoy the complication that Fagin had already figured out what Oliver's deal was, even though Oliver didn't know, and so he's all on board with say, "Yeah, I'll just keep him under my wing until I can get paid for turning him over to the right person who will come and pay me for him."
Yep.
And then when Artful Dodger comes back and says, "Nope, we lost him," there's a little bit of a what? Oh no. I will say though that I liked the orphanage stuff, just almost like I wanted to say the satire of it, except that it's almost kind of not even satire, but just like all of the stuff of like the Beatles' whole thing of like, oh, he's being disobedient when you discipline him. Well, it's because you feed him too well. You should just don't feed him so much meat, and he'll be better behaved. And that sort of stuff is just horrifying, but just said in such a blasé way. It's darkly funny is how it plays. But then also I think Bill Sykes is actually a really great villain. I think because he's definitely scary, but he's scary in a very sort of human way that feels authentic in a way that a lot of the other heightened characters don't. You know what I mean? How did you feel about that?
No, I yeah, I agree. I think he's because he's less vivid maybe than Fagin. I don't know if that's right
Well, less
descriptor, but
heightened. Yeah,
yeah,
he's
heightened. Like that's what you're
yeah.
saying. Yeah,
There's
yeah,
no
I think that's
there's
it.
no pretense with him. He is
Right.
what he is. He's a thief who sells his stolen goods to the person who will buy them, and yeah.
Yeah, there's almost a scariness to the efficiency that he has built,
Mhm.
on what it is that he does, the
Right.
evil that he does.
Right. Like he is, for all that we've talked about, like the example of maybe Miss Havisham as this example of the decadence and waste of the upper classes. He kind of represents like the opposite extreme in the sense of like the low cunning of the criminal who's just there to survive. And we can, on the one hand, say that there's a lot of societal problems that contributed to a man like him being the way he is, but nonetheless, he is not sympathetic. We are not worried about for him. We are worried only about him, and what he might do. And sure enough, he kills Nancy, I think was the character, right? Who is, his girlfriend, but who had started to figure out also what maybe Oliver's deal was in an attempt to try to help him, because she was the one that overheard people talking about him and put it together that, oh, wait, that's the kid that I saw over at Fagan's. And so, but then betraying all of that gets her killed, and that's very sad. But then, of course, I thought it was interesting the portrayal of law enforcement in the context of this time period of London, because apparently it's just 100% mob justice with the occasional perfunctory court case afterwards. Right? Like, because, like, when there's pickpocketing, oh, just a bunch of people who happen to be standby chase the kids down and beat them up. And then, we hear there's a murder. Well, I guess there's a constable or something who's vaguely involved, but mostly it's just a whole big crowd of people chases Bill Sykes around until he's cornered up on a roof. And then I guess there's some police officers that shoot at him, right? But I mean, mostly it just feels like, oh, that's what happens in London, is that if there's a murder, you just get everybody who happens to be nearby to chase down this person as a mob. That was strange to me.
I Again, I feel like that's Dickensian.
Yeah, it made me curious to wonder, like, to think about like what actual, because I think there's huge chunks of history, and arguably still today, where law enforcement primarily exists to protect rich people from poor people, and that's it. But
Yes,
without necessarily getting too much into it now, it's certainly, there have been times where that was not merely assumed, but like explicitly true, like obviously true. That was, no one would have even disputed it, right? It's like the nice part of town that gets patrols, and the rest of town that's on its own.
yeah. Well, I
Um,
think I keep describing, or at least I kept describing Great Expectations as
mm,
rhetorical, in like written for effect, kind of rhetorical.
mm-hmm,
Not the way that sometimes people mean rhetorical, like it doesn't answer its own question. That's not what it's it's for effect.
mm-hmm,
Um, but I think he's almost satirical in a way that just but in a different way than we're used to,
mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's what some of this
Yeah,
is like it's meant to be satire in like how Dickens writes. Like, yes, those things were a thing, but he plays it up way more than like how it probably actually was,
mm-hmm,
right?
yeah. Well, I mean, obviously he's writing serial fiction for an
Yes.
audience, right? So.
But I think I mean, I feel like that this one, and that's why I almost like differentiate, even though he's the same writer. Like I feel Great Expectations is more on like the rhetorical side of things, and
Yeah,
this
yeah,
more on the satirical side. But it's not the satire that we're used to,
yeah.
because it comes with such a serious tone,
Like
and so it's weird. Yeah,
I felt a bit more like Great Expectations felt like it was trying to actually say something and make points about the society, whereas Oliver Twist felt a little bit more pulpy by comparison. Like, we
I
all
agree.
know certain things about the way the world works, and I'm just telling a story that takes place there, and it's not really trying to say something in the same way.
Yeah, I I agree, and I used to think that it was because, like I told you, I think my experience with Great Expectations is I've read it and seen this movie.
Hmm.
Oliver Twist, I'm pretty sure I've never read. I don't want to say I've never read it. I might have at some point, but I don't remember reading it.
Mm.
And I always thought that my difference in approaching these two movies was because of that. But I think the actual sort, I think what David Lean did was actually deliver pretty good representation of the source material,
Hmm.
and that this one just isn't as good.
Yeah. I mean, one just on the David Lean of it all. One of the things that we really haven't talked about at all here is just that all of the different depictions of the London streets and the various blocks and alleys and attics and fancy houses and slums that are in this. Like, I mean, the sets look great. You know, again, the production design of it is really good, really
Yeah,
good.
even when he's not doing like the epic,
Yeah,
like he's very good at that part of it.
right.
And I think that's part of why I always liked that version of Great Expectations, is even though it's in, like, at least the version I watched was like in 4:4, like it wasn't even
Well, 4:3,
four
right?
by three,
Yeah,
sorry, not, but it wasn't 16:9,
right.
which all of his later films were.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Lawrence is like it's even wider than that, right? Isn't that one of those extra
Yeah,
wide
it
ones?
was one of those when they did like a weird particular thing, 70
Yeah,
millimeter XYZ. Yeah.
right. But yeah, I think pretty much everything was 4:3 still at this time period. Um,
Yeah, but you still, so you don't get the that immersive epic feel, but
mhm.
you're 100% right. Like every one of his sets, and I think honestly that's part of what makes like the first set with like the prisoner and Great Expectations like so like palpable, is that like that marsh where he takes him the food, like there's something to that set design more than just the script and
Yeah.
the actors, right?
Hmm.
And there's scenes in Oliver Twist where it's the same thing, where you're like, wow, like that alley, like that just feels intimidating in a
Hmm.
way that maybe it wouldn't, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So he's very skilled at that, and I think that evokes part of what Dickens was trying to get at. So
Hmm. Yeah. So I think that covers our exploration into some of David Lean's back catalog. You know, what did he do before he did the two big ones that we put on the list? And I think we're kind of agreed that none of these three belong on the top 100, but
sort of,
regardless.
these two were before, Zhivago came after.
Well, oh, right. Oh, okay. I guess I didn't look up the timeline of it. So sure enough. Yeah, but I guess what I meant is just other than. I didn't.
Other than,
Yeah.
yes.
Um, but yeah. Uh, so on that basis, what should we do next?
So you floated this to me, and I agree with it. I like these where we sort of deep dive on like one aspect of whether it's a director or we're going to do an actor or a writer
Hmm.
or whatever we're going to do. I really like this. Um, as a very quick aside, it's something I've been doing in my like reading life lately. Is when I read something that I really like I'm going deep with that author as opposed to just like picking something else I was interested in.
Sure.
And it's actually, there's something that's nice about that,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
they're not all the same, you know, and you can see the growth and the changes and all that kind of stuff, but you're kind of in that mindset. So
Hmm.
I I like that. I want to do that with whatever we choose next.
All
So
right. No. So that sounds good, but then that just means we need to pick someone. So I had tossed out a couple of names. Were any so here, ones that had just occurred to me? Um, Orson Welles, obviously, with Citizen Kane, is one of the like it's up there at the top of the list. But it was his first movie, and he did make others. So there are several of his other ones that we could take a look at. I also had Sam Raimi on the brain just because he obviously directed the most recent Marvel movie, which I thought was great. Um, but and then Frank Capra was another name that I tossed out there. But we could also do it based on performers. So I don't know. Did you have any other ideas or
No,
names?
I mean the only one that I sort of came across, which I'm not heavily lobbying for, and it didn't sound like, is that I watched one of the Dan Brown, Ron Howard, Tom Hanks adaptations,
Mm.
and those are, I mean, they're not great,
Well,
but
it's
they're,
like the Da Vinci Code and
yeah,
Angels
Da
and
Vinci
Demons,
Code,
right?
Angels and Demons, Inferno, I
Huh.
think is the are the three that were made into films.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
I think that would. I mean, I could be persuaded, but it's probably not my first choice. If only because all three of those kind of feel like they go in the same mental box for me. Like I'm not.
that's the point.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
but I just mean that I don't know that I would have different things to say about them other than like you know what I mean. Like I feel like my feelings about each one would be very similar to the others. I don't know.
the I mean, the Da Vinci Code does come with a little bit of a little societal, cultural
I guess. I mean,
punch
it's
that
been a
comes
while
with that
since I
one.
watched it, perhaps. So I don't know. If you really want to lobby for it, I could be persuaded, but it would probably not be one that I would jump at.
So the reason why I wanted to lobby for it is not because I'm like passionate about these films or books. Like I do enjoy them,
Hmm.
but I thought it was a different. It came to me as a different way to kind of approach this, right? Like
Okay.
here's another kind of deep dive that we can do. We can take like a director, an actor, and an author who all latched on to a series
Hmm.
and decided to make it, and it was successful. And what is that? Do are they all, to your point, like are they all in the same mindset?
Hmm.
Are Was any more heavy than the other? Did they all need to be made? Should they make more? I that was why.
Okay. Well, I mean, like if you want to propose that that's the next three movies we do, we could do that. I just sort of I don't think I liked the Da Vinci Code all that much, and I didn't see the other two, so that's kind of where I'm at.
Right, and you obviously didn't read the books either,
No.
so which that's another. I mean, the Da Vinci Code book is
Hmm.
it. If you watch the movie, to your point of like, oh, is it really that? I mean, but yeah, if you read the book, there's some stuff in there that was kind of a, I don't know. So
I don't know either, so I'm not sure. So I don't know. Are you want do you want to do those movies?
I'm happy to talk about those movies, and happy to watch them again. I enjoy them.
Okay.
Just yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess we just got to get it out there. I mean, the problem that the Da Vinci Code has is that it takes some pretty strong stances. Well, it's complicated. Like there's some things that are very against standard Christian doctrine,
Mm-hmm.
but there are some things that are very much in supportive of it, and that's where
Mm-hmm.
it's like, if you really want to talk about it, you have to be willing to have some of those conversations.
Yeah.
And so that's part of what makes it complicated. Like,
Okay. Well, so again, I'm willing. I just don't know that I have all that much to bring to those conversations. Is I guess where I'm coming from.
yeah, I mean, if that's, and yeah, and so let's shelve that one and let's
Okay.
pick something else for this one. But we'll
All
we'll
right.
have that in the back. That
Okay.
that'll be
Yeah.
that'll be a
So.
go-to if we ever want to. Yeah.
All right. So I take it then that none of the other names that I had suggested leapt out at you as
I no, I needed to look up. I needed to figure out what Sam Raimi movies
well. So he
we
did
could do.
the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. Obviously, he did the
Yeah.
Evil Dead trilogy. He did A Simple Plan. He did The Quick and the Dead.
Right, and that's where, like, I think that was what. So that one. I was interested in, but
Mm-hmm.
it was like he's kind of got a lot of different stuff,
Yeah.
like I would love to watch A Simple Plan again.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so in some respects, what we might maybe could do with him is pick some movies that like A Simple Plan is probably his most like I don't want to say highbrow. That's not exactly what I mean, but maybe his most grounded, serious film.
Yeah, it's like a noir.
Yeah, as opposed to there's not really anything fantastical about it.
Mm-mm.
Um, but let's see, there's also like The Gift. For the love of the game, I don't think I ever saw. I don't really know what's in that one. But like for example, one of the like
He's
what we could maybe do
it's like every
is
other Kevin Costner
yeah.
sports movie. So
Oh, okay, yeah. So for example, what we could do is we could take A Simple Plan, which is maybe his most like sort of straight laced movie, and then we could pick one of the Spider-Man movies because he's done superheroes. But then we could also do one of his, go back to the roots, and maybe we don't need to do the first Evil Dead, but maybe Evil Dead 2. What do you think?
yeah, so isn't there an argument that Evil Dead 2 is actually better than Evil Dead?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, 100%. We could totally have that conversation. But the thing is, the first Evil Dead is remarkable for the potential that it shows, more so than what it actually contains. Um, the
So
two is
so we're
better.
saying we do Evil Dead 2,
Yeah,
Simple Plan,
and
and which of his Spider-Mans are the
I will probably end up rewatching the whole trilogy, if for no other reason than because it has been
Doctor Strange and
forever
the
since. Hmm?
First Madness,
Well,
because the new one's coming out, or
no. Honestly, the Spider-Man movies that Sam Raimi did tied into the Spider-Man No Way Home, but not in the Doctor Strange. So like
oh,
that's not
that's
a
that.
canon.
Oh, so even though that's a multiverse thing, it has nothing to do with Spider-Man's multiverse.
Well, in the sense that it has to do with Marvel's multiverse, and it is connected to how Doctor Strange was in that movie, right? So there's continuity, but it's not about that.
Got it.
So Spider-Man does not show up in Multiverse of Madness. That wasn't why. It was really more a matter of having seen No Way Home reminded me of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies and how I have watched the first two way more than three because three is kind of regarded as not being as good, but it's also been a long time since I've seen it. But I think two would be the one, right? Like I think that's the one that's kind of thought of as like that's the best of them. I will probably watch
Oh,
all three,
that's
but
with Doctor Octopus,
yeah,
right? Doctor
mm-hmm,
Otto. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. So we're gonna commit to Evil Dead 2, Simple Plan, Spider-Man 2.
yeah,
We have the freedom to watch any other Sam Raimi movies that we
sure,
want
yeah.
that might
I mean,
color
Quick
our
and the Dead is an
discussion.
awful lot of fun.
I do like The Quick and the Dead. That's one that I was actually going to go to.
Yeah,
Uh, Drag Me to Hell is actually
he's
kind of
made a lot of great movies. Turns out
it's
the
just I
guy.
mean it's a silly horror movie, but
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's I mean yeah
Well,
he's
how
made
about yeah? So how about this? We will do those three definitely, but
and then we could smorgasbord some other ones that we
yeah,
enjoy and we can
mm-hmm,
kind of throw them into the conversation.
yeah. All
I
right,
like it.
sounds good to me. So Sam Raimi, next time when we return to talk about more movies on watching 100 movies and counting.